Black History Month you find
ridiculous. You're going to relegate my history to a month? What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month?
The Tikar and Bamileke peoples in Cameroon.
To finally be able to claim a place, a specific place, it's as if all those bodies that lay at the bottom of the Atlantic, it's like the boats have come back home, and like in the slave narratives, we have flown back. I've flown back home.
I'm Jewish.
He says, no. Where are you from, my sister?
Right.
And I didn't know.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't.
Oh, why not?
We sent the sample of your DNA to the DNA Diagnostic Center.
Do you want one?
No.
I don't either.
You are 0% East Asian.
You lost 5% of your brain.
A comparison of the Islamic slave trade to the American slave trade reveals some extremely interesting contrasts. While 2 out of every 3 slaves shipped across the Atlantic were men, the proportions were reversed in the Islamic slave trade.
I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
We are the Ku Klux Klan. We hate niggers, we hate Jews, we hate faggots, and we hate spicks.
Fuck you, nigga.
The success of Muhammadan Islam in deceiving, misinforming, deforming, and contorting both history and reality over a period of almost 1400 years has been astounding. That is, until now. The greatest tragedy about this particular subject is that most of the descendants of African slavery, the black people in the Americas, around the world, as well as among the African blacks, are totally ignorant of the actual facts. Before we lose the concentration of our listeners, I would like to make the following statement and then prove it. That the worst, most inhumane and most diabolical institution of the black African slave trade was initiated, refined, perpetrated and implemented by the Mohammedan Arabs and later aided and abetted by the black converts to Mohammedan Islam.
You are 6% European.
I predict that, as usual, the 2 subcultures, those of denial of facts and of political correctness, will attack us without once disproving a single statement and or conclusion that we make. Slavery was not created by the white races, because it has existed throughout human history and practiced by every tribe, culture, civilization, racial group and religion. In fact, the very word slavery has its root in the name Slav, based upon the Slavic peoples of Europe who were subjugated by other Europeans. It is not common knowledge that the Arabic word abd is synonymous with the meaning of slave. For example, Abdullah means literally the slave of Allah, and that in the language of the Arabs, all black peoples are called abid, plural, for slaves. While much has been written concerning the transatlantic slave trade, surprisingly little attention has been paid to the Islamic slave trade across the Sahara, the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. While the European involvement in the African transatlantic slave trade to the Americas lasted for just over 3 centuries, the Arab involvement in the African slave trade has lasted 14 centuries. and in some parts of the Mohammedan world is still continuing to this day.
Yes, it is indeed true that Jews invented the Hamitic myth, whereby it was said that Ham, the son of Noah, was cursed in the book of Genesis, and somehow it was said that Ham was the progenitor of the African race, and that all Africans would be cursed and enslaved for time immemorial because of this so-called biblical curse on Ham. We now know that it was Jewish scholars who invented the story of the Hamitic myth, which has plagued black people from that point on. Yes, it is true, we now know that Jews were very importantly involved in the slave trade in medieval times, both, as Professor Clark has said, in the East, in the Arabic areas, and also in Europe. That is even before our African slave trade to the Americas. Yes, it is true, as we now know, the Jews were the ones who invented what came to be known as white slavery, whereby Jewish entrepreneurs in Europe in the late 19th century prostituted their own Jewish women, sent them around the world as prostitutes, what came to be known as white slavery. Yes, it is true, as we now know, the Jews were heavily invested in the Dutch West India Company. The Dutch West India Company, that company which was a private corporation doing the job of colonizing, which was responsible in large measure for the African slave trade. The Dutch West India Company that owned the Elmina Fort in what is now Ghana. The Dutch West India Company that brought slaves from Africa to the Caribbean, to South America. The same Dutch West India Company that brought the first slaves to New York, when it was still New Amsterdam. Yes, it is true, as we now know, that the Jews were a major element in the slave trade in Brazil in the 1600s, in Suriname, in Curacao, in Barbados, in Jamaica. Yes, it is true, as we now know, that the two largest single shipments of slaves coming into this country in the 18th century were on ships owned by Jews. It is true, as we now know, that Aaron Lopez, biggest slave ship owner in the United States of America, was a Jew. It is also true, as we now know, that all the rum distilleries in Newport, Rhode Island, in the era of the slave trade were owned by Jews. Rum, as we know, was a very important item in the transatlantic slave trade. Yes, it is true, as we now know, that there was a higher per capita ownership of slaves in the United States of America by Jews than by white Gentiles. We now know from the 1830 census of the US of A that something like 75% of Jewish households own slaves, as opposed to just 30-odd% for the white population as a whole.
Drum roll, please. Snoop Dogg, you are 71% sub-Saharan African.
White folks see us as thugs. I don't care what y'all think. I don't care if you think you a lawyer, if you a man, if you an African American, if you whatever the fuck you think you are. We thugs and niggas to these motherfuckers. You know? And until